This next demo will demonstrate to you how to use arcs, gradients, and even write text out to the canvas. So the final result looks like this. And what's happening here are there's two circles being drawn using two different radial gradients and some text being placed on top of that. So let's start down here with the radial gradient. I start by accessing context and calling create radial gradient. And the arguments, as you can see in the comments here, require a number of different settings. So to begin with, you have to tell the gradient what X and Y coordinates you want it to start at. Then you also need to give the radius of the start circle, and then the X and Y coordinates of the gradient's ending points. Then you also need to provide the radius of the end circle. Once you have all that information set, then you can add in color stops. Now, gradients are a transition between one color to the next, and sometimes that transition is only between two colors. Sometimes, though, you may want it to transition between more than two colors. So when you add a color stop, what you can do is add in a value somewhere between 0 and 1. So for this image, what I wanted to do was create a gradient from one color here to another color over here. But if I wanted an intermediary color to happen in the middle, and that fade or that gradation to happen between those three colors, then I could add another color stop in between these, and the value might be 0.5 or 0.25 or 0.75, whatever makes sense for the type of look you're looking for. All that to say is when you add a color stop, it's any value between 0 and 1 inclusively. So that gives you an opportunity to define separate stops within your gradient. So the gradient will go from white to this gray, and when I apply it to an arc that goes all the way around, which is basically another way of saying a circle, it'll look like this. Now, one of the techniques that you can use in order to create an image that kind of looks like it's being pressed in or have a bevel to it is you have a gradient going one way, and then you take that gradient or a similar gradient and flip it and have it go the opposite direction. And that's what's going on here. So all of this code is the definition for the first gradient. Now with that gradient available, I can apply it to the base circle. So here in the context, I'm switching the line width set to 0 and setting the stroke style to black. Then the fill style is being set to the gradient that I created up above. So G1 is defined right here. Then I tell the context to begin path and then define an arc. Again, there's a number of different arguments that are required in order to make this happen. The first is the X and Y coordinate of the start position of the arc. Then I give it the radius, the start angle, and then the end angle. Now, in order to create a full circle, the end angle needs to be math.pi multiplied by 2. And then this final Boolean argument of anticlockwise tells the arc whether it will stroke it clockwise or counterclockwise. Now, this doesn't really make much of a difference when you're creating a circle, but when you're doing partial arcs, it does become valuable. Once all of that's set, all I need to do is call context.fill, then the circle is created on the canvas using the radial gradient that I provided up in fill style. Now, the same process is used in order to create the second radial gradient and the second circle. So here I'm creating another gradient, passing in very similar values, except this one is a little bit smaller. The same color stops and the same color values are used. I create another circle by passing in the gradient into fill style. Call begin path and make this circle just a little bit smaller. And the XY position is a little bit further in from the parent circle so that it sits on top of it. Once I have the dimensions for that circle, I can call fill, and that second circle is filled in with the gradient that I provided. Finally, in order to add the text into the image, I set fill style to white, set the font to 280 pixels, Arial font face, and then I can define the fill text as being whatever text, in this case it's the letter C, with the accompanying XY coordinates in order to provide placement to the text. Now there's something I want you to take note of as you're looking at this code. When you're working with Canvas, one of the things that you're not doing is defining a number of different objects in a model and creating a bunch of different settings through some sort of composition model. What you can do is think of it as an artist using a paintbrush or a pen or any one of the other tools at a time. So as I'm defining the arc, all the commands that deal with the arc happen in succession, and then I call fill. That creates the arc and fills it. Then when I move on to creating the font, I set fill style and font and fill text. So all the commands happen in a linear fashion. And this can really help to simplify development because you know only the immediate commands given to context are the ones that will be executed.